The gods, almighty beings responsible for the world as we know it, masters of creation and the worldly powers, the final arbiters of man. Or a collection of rather self-centered, nameless beings not that interested in anything much beyond what game they get to play next? Given the nature of Discworld, I think we all know the answer. Hello and welcome back to the Discworld lore series. This week we'll be taking a look at the race of beings that are mentioned several times so far in our series, so I thought it would be a good idea to go into them in detail. These of course are gods. Since the disc exists in a region of the multiverse where reality is somewhat less consistent than it appears to be in our own, more mundane corner of existence, reality on the disc is so fragile and malleable that the belief of living mortal minds and souls counts for a lot more. This belief has a tendency to take on a life of its own, and the gods are the most common and noticeable expression of this power on the Discworld. There are roughly 3,000 gods on the Discworld, and the hard-working research theologians of the Temple of Small Gods are discovering more every day. They are also present on a universal scale, with gods moving in soon after a world has been created. Gods always exist in potentia, for at the moment that an event of any note occurs, which can be as minor as two snails happening to cross a single point with their trails, or a place where two colonies of ants regularly clash amid their tiny tunnels, a god becomes tied to it and begins to manifest in the physical world. Quite what gods actually are is a debated matter, as there are stated to be billions of them in the wider universe. But none have any power without believers. The term small god is in fact used to describe them in this state. Spirits found in deserts and lost places, desperate for power and prestige and hungry for belief. Every believer adds more power, the god grows and can perform more deeds, in turn leading to more believers. But while this blooming power can be so good for a god, there is always the risk of the fall, and the higher you climb, the much further you have to fall. If the people should cease believing in the particular god, the god begins to fade and they will eventually die, becoming little more than a wispy echo on the wind, nothing but memories of power echoing throughout it for all time. The most common and ironic way for this to happen is that when the church becomes more important than the faith. When the dogma and the rules and the priesthood and the structure become too advanced and too ingrained in the people's lives, their belief subtly shifts, subconsciously, away from the god, and instead they believe in the system. You do not believe in the god anymore, you believe in the organization that claims to have the god at its head, and so the god, without anyone noticing, becomes irrelevant and dies, returning to being naught but a breeze on the desert wind, while the power of the church grows on, with its figurehead long forgotten. Gods, of course, play games with the fates of men. This is a common saying, but on the Discworld it is literal truth. The game they play is somewhere between Dungeons and Dragons, Risk, and chess, with Monopoly and battleships thrown in for good measure along the way. However, gods really don't have the patience for complex games. They prefer games that are short, violent, and very satisfying. The game is played on a map of the world that is. If you look closely enough at the tiny pin that is Cori Celesti in the middle of the board, you can see the gods on top of it in their home, done manifesting, playing the game. If you look closer still, it might be possible to see a tiny little game board on the tiny little temples. In truth, the gods do not actually control every individual soul in the world, as that could get boring very fast, not to mention a right bucket to keep track of. Instead, they will oversee a handful of key players, aiding them as best they can, but more or less just being along for the ride. In truth, then, the games that the gods play have an element of simply betting on the horses and seeing who comes in first. As mentioned, the main abode of the gods is situated atop a mountain known as Cori Celesti, the central mountain of the disc's hub. It is an awesome spire of grey stone and green ice that is roughly 10 miles high, that forms a near-perfect cylinder the higher you go. Suffice to say, from the very top you can see right to the rim, and the uniquely strong magical field means that once you get above a certain height, the centre of gravity shifts to the mountain itself, meaning that you could stroll up the horizontal as if it were mere flat ground. The vast magical field earths itself consistently on the mountain, and at night the field glows with cold fire, known as the Aurora Coriolis. Atop sits Dun Manifestin, the home of the gods. While you might expect it to be a stylish and majestic palace, the truth is that it functions rather more like a gated community with buildings full of rather peevish tenants. Every god who resides there has a home of sorts within, scaled to their appropriate level of power and constructed within their own cultural origins, resulting in a city of mixed buildings in many scales, sizes, and levels of taste. An accurate view of the domestic nature of the gods can be taken from the fact that most of them think a novelty musical doorbell is fabulously good fun. in addition to sending regular noise complaint letters to the ice giants in the valleys below. The Hall of Games sits in the centre of this city, which contains the aforementioned map of the Discworld, as well as the high seat of Blind Io, the chief of the gods. Now, you might suspect gods need belief and power to reside in Dun Manifestin. So, how do so many of them manage to achieve this? Well, to be perfectly blunt, they cheat. To give an example of this, we return to the chief of the gods just mentioned, Io. Blind Io is the thunder god. In other fields, for example, there may be one rain god worshipped in Ankh-Morpork and another rain god worshipped in Hawonderland. Blind Io manages to be the thunder god of all of the disc by diligently wielding the thunders and making appearances in all the right places, wearing false moustaches, beards, and other accessories, switching between different shapes of cultural thunder hammers and other tools required for where he might be as he finds necessary. His believers in separate countries or regions think that they all worship separate thunder gods and indeed have gone to war on each other for this purpose. But in fact, they all believe in the being that is known to itself as Blind Io. It should be noted that while he holds the position of thunder god, he does not actually have exclusive rights over lightning, only thunder. Lightning is a general commodity, the right of all gods, and this is because it is their primary tool for dealing with atheists, heathens, and smart-ass philosophers who like to try and explain the gods. It is for this reason that I am recording this video stood very carefully under a nice piece of copper shielding, because one can never be too careful. One final note is what can happen in countries with too many gods. An example we see in the books is in pyramids. The small river kingdom of Djelibeybi has a couple hundred gods, as it has in its thousands of years of history thrown away a single one. However, none of them really manifest any power in the same way as the other gods. This is because the belief in this kingdom is spread too thinly between too many gods to empower any one of them very much. But all the subconscious belief does go to other places. Quite where that is, and what happens when said kingdom is placed in its own space and time, where their belief is all the belief that there is in the world, well, that's all covered in the novel, so I won't want to spoil it for you here. Ultimately, there is a lot that we could say about the individual and notable residents of Dun Manifestin and the other gods across the world. But these are deserving of topics unto themselves, and not least the ones known as Fate and the Lady. For now, therefore, I do hope you've enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe for more. Maybe drop a comment about any gods below if you want me to cover them in a particular order. But until then, I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.